What is going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel, and today I'm going to teach you guys how to take an image that looks like this and make it look like this. So this is actually something I've been doing quite a lot of lately. If you actually go into my Instagram and you look at my feed, I kind of do like an every other type of thing where I post a portrait and then like a city, landscape, whatever, and then a portrait, another city, landscape, whatever. That's kind of my theme. I go back and forth, but as of late, I really haven't been making it out and doing a whole lot of shooting. Haven't been getting into the city. So what I've really been doing is going back in the archives, going back to the old hard drives and looking for images that were actually pretty cool, except for the fact they had a boring sky. So I've been going into those images, ripping out the old sky, dropping in a new one, and blending them together, and then posting those on my feed. And it's just something I've been doing lately, so I thought I'd share with you guys my process for doing that. That way you guys can go back through your old hard drives, your old images, things that you thought were just kind of like blah images that you were never gonna post, you just delegated them back to your trash. So maybe this way you can go through, pull out those old photos and kind of breathe new life into them and drop them on your feed and get a whole ton of likes. So yeah, without any further ado, let's actually hop out over to Photoshop and let's get started on my process. Okay guys, so here we are in Photoshop. So this is the image I'm gonna be using. I actually posted this one to my Instagram a couple weeks ago. I'm gonna go and I replaced the sky in it, and that's what I'm gonna be doing today. I'm gonna walk you guys through that process. So the very first thing that we're gonna need to do, and this is really the first thing I do with pretty much most of the images that I replace the sky in, is I wanna make a selection of the sky itself. That's usually easier than trying to select the foreground, just because there's so much going on here. There's so many lines. If you're trying to use the quick selection tool, it's gonna be very difficult for Photoshop to figure out what you're trying to make a selection of. If you go the other way and try to select the sky, it becomes much easier, especially in an image like this where we have all these very hard lines. It makes it very easy for Photoshop to make a selection. Now, another way you could do this is you could definitely go in with the pen tool and do that as well, but that can be very time consuming. So for an image like this, what I would recommend is go over here to your tool panel and go ahead and hit the or select your quick selection tool. You can also hit W on your keyboard in order to bring it up. And then at the very top, what you're gonna wanna do is make sure you have this button in the center toggled on, which is your add to selection toggle button. So make sure that's turned on, and then when you're looking at it on your screen, you'll see inside that circle there's a little plus sign. So that means you're adding to your selection, which is what we want. So once you have that selected, what I'm gonna do is go ahead, make my brush a little bit bigger, and then I'm just gonna click over here in the sky, making sure my background layer is selected, and it should do a fairly decent job of beginning to select the sky. Now, if we zoom in, we'll actually notice that it didn't do a great job on this building right here. You can see where it's kind of starting to select some of the building. We don't want that. We only want to select the sky. So what we need to do is go in here and refine the selection a little bit and tell Photoshop that we do not want that building as a part of our selection. So the way we're gonna do that is with the quick selection tool still activated, what we're gonna do is basically just use the option key to toggle between adding to the selection or removing from the selection. So as I hit the option key, you can see inside my cursor here, it actually changes over to a minus sign. It's a little hard to see, it's very small, but hopefully you guys can see that. But if you hold the option key, it'll basically toggle to remove from selection. And then what we're gonna do is with that kind of toggled on, we're just gonna click over here where the building is and just tell Photoshop to remove this building from the selection. And we might need to do a few clicks here so that Photoshop figures out what it is we're trying to do. But there we go. Now it kind of fixed that. It's got the selection on the edge of that building. It did a fairly good job once we told it what not to do. And then we're gonna do the same thing along here as well. Now right here where there's this little sun flare, there's not a whole lot of contrast. So obviously Photoshop had a harder time trying to figure out what it is we're trying to make a selection of, because it's looking for like high contrast points. There's obviously not a lot right here. So what we can do if you wanted to clean this up a little bit and kind of get along the edge of this building, even though we don't really need to, what we could do is go over here to your toolbar. Normally you'll have your lasso tool as your tool default in the toolbar. If you hold down on your lasso tool, you'll get the option for this polygonal lasso tool, so you can bring that up. And then what we can do is go ahead, and again, we want to remove from the selection, so hold down the option key, you'll get that little minus sign that pops up, and then just kind of select along this edge and then right around it, and then close it off. And we should eliminate that little section from the selection. I'm gonna go back over to my quick selection tool, and then just kind of look along the edge here a little bit more and make sure we're looking pretty good. So it's actually not selecting this building a little bit, but that's actually okay. I'm not super particular about this. This is actually looking pretty darn good to me. I think Photoshop is doing a fairly decent job of making the selection. And let's just check up along here, along the edge of this building. And yeah, this looks pretty good too. All right, cool. So now the next thing we need to do is make sure we get all of the sky, right? So if we look and we zoom back out, we've got this portion of the sky, but we also have this portion over here too. And since it's cut off from the rest of the sky, we need to just go in here and just make sure we select that as well. So again, quick selection tool, make sure you have add to selection selected, and then just go ahead and select inside of that, and then it should do a fairly good job, which it did. And so now we've got both parts of the sky selected, this big chunk over here and this smaller chunk here. And now what we want to do, now that we have the sky selected, is actually inverse the selection so that we're basically selecting all of the buildings in the foreground. So the very easy way of doing that is just anywhere on your screen, go ahead and right click on your mouse and go to select inverse. And then now we've selected everything but the sky. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take all of that and we're gonna put it on its new layer without the sky. So, and that's very easy to do. All we have to do is do Command J on the keyboard, and then that's gonna take everything in that selection and put it on a new layer right above it. And if I turn off the background layer, we can see we now have the foreground that we just had, and then we've got this empty sky back here with nothing. Basically, it's almost like it deleted the sky. But rather than actually deleting the sky from the background layer, what we really did was we just made a selection of the foreground and we put it on its new layer up above it. And if we turn on the background layer, you can see we still have the background layer that's untouched, but the sky's still there. So we can always go back to that layer if we ever need to, if we need to correct things, or if we need to blend in that background layer a little bit more. I find that a much more useful way rather than just making a selection on a new layer and deleting the sky. So we're looking pretty good there. All right, so now the next thing we're gonna need to do is bring in an actual sky. I've already got a sky actually loaded in here. If you don't already have one, you can either go online and like get one from a stock photography website and go to Unsplash. You can look through your other images, and if you've got a really cool, awesome sunset shot, you can go ahead and bring that into your Photoshop project. But once you have that sunset loaded in, go ahead and make sure it's turned on. And then what you're gonna wanna do is make sure that the sunset layer is below your foreground layer. So actually, let me go ahead and rename this layer 1 that we just created, and I'm gonna name it foreground, just to make it easy to follow along with. All right, so now we've got our foreground layer and we've got our sunset layer. And the sunset layer, again, you want it below your foreground layer. That way it's behind the city, and we've got our foreground in the front, we've got our sky in the back, and that's pretty much what we're gonna want. So now the next thing we need to do is pay attention to the background layer and try to find a good placement for it so that it makes sense within the image as a whole. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit Command T to transform it. And then this is gonna allow me to move it around. And what I really wanna do is, so in the foreground, we can see that in our original image, the sun was right behind this building. So what I wanna do is make sure the sky, the brightest part of our sky, is kind of lined up with where the sun was, because that's just what's gonna make sense. I'm actually gonna make this a little bit bigger so that it covers up all the edges. And then I'm gonna align the sky, the white part of the sky, with that sun flare. So something like right there is looking pretty good to me. Something like that. I might make it a little bit bigger. So like right there, I'm liking the way that looks. That's pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit enter and select that change. And then now we've got our sky kind of placed where we want it. And that's what I would recommend that you do with yours. Just look at your image, see where the sun was originally, or try to find the brightest part of the image, and then line that up with where the sun should have been in the image that you're using as your foreground element. All right, so now that we've done that, we're done. That's it, guys. Nope, okay, I'm lying, I know. This totally looks like crap for two reasons. One, because the exposures of the sky and our foreground image, they don't match. So we need to make sure that the brightness of both the city and the sky itself, they match. So that's number one. And then number two, obviously the colors are way off. They don't look good at all. So we need to fix both of those things in order to begin to kind of sell this and not make it look like a completely botched Photoshop job. I think I almost said photo shit job, which would have been like a total Freudian slip. But anyway, we need to have we want to make this look like real, right? We want to make sure, we want to sell it. We don't want people to look at it and be like, oh, that'd be totally Photoshop. That looks like, we don't want that. We want people to look at it and be like, oh man, that's amazing sunset. I wish I was there. I wish I saw that too. So in order to begin this whole process of making this look a lot more realistic, the very first thing we're gonna need to do, or the first thing that I do, is I try to get the exposures to match. So what I typically do is I will go down here and I will create a black and white adjustment layer. And then what that is going to do is it's basically, obviously, it's going to turn to black and white, right? So by removing the color from the image, it's going to allow us to focus more so on the brightness of each relative image. And then that way we can concentrate more on that and not be distracted by the color. So in this particular case, I would say that the sky is quite a bit brighter than the foreground. So I've got two options. Either one, I can darken the sky, or two, I can brighten the foreground, or I guess the third option would be I could try to do a little of both on each. In this particular case, what I think I'm going to do is just try to bring down the sky and make the sky look a little bit darker. So to do that, I'm gonna go ahead and select the sky, our sunset layer. I'm gonna go down here to my adjustment layers, and I'm going to create a curves adjustment layer. And then I'm gonna go down here to this little button, this little icon right here, which is to create a clipping mask. And then what that is going to do is it's going to make this curves adjustment layer only be applied to the sunset layer. So for example, if I drag this curve up, you can see it's only brightening the sky. If I drag it down, it's only darkening the sky. So that's what a clipping mask is gonna do. And in this particular case, what I wanna do is pull down the shadows a little bit, make it a little bit darker there. Midtones can come down a little bit as well, and then I might bring the highlights up. Basically just doing a very traditional S-curve, adding a little bit of contrast while also darkening the image just a little bit, just to make it look a little bit more like it belongs with our foreground. So I might drag the highlights down a little bit more, bring the midtones down a little more, maybe bring the shadows down just a little more as well. Something like that is starting to look pretty good to me. And that's a good start. We can play more with it later. I wouldn't worry about it too much. I kind of do it like a little bit of the color, a little bit of the brightness, a little bit of the color, kind of go back and forth a little bit and fine tune it as we go along. But right there, that's looking pretty good to me. I'm happy with that. So I'm gonna go ahead and collapse that panel, and I'm gonna turn off the black and white layer. And I think the brightness definitely matches a little bit better. Now the next thing we need to do is go ahead and start getting the color to match. Now this part can be a little bit tricky for sure. I would definitely say that in this particular case, our sky is definitely way more blue than the foreground. So what we really wanna do is we wanna try to warm up the sky and make the sky look like it belongs within our scene. So there's a couple ways of going about doing that. What I'm going to do is use a curves adjustment layer for that. So what I'm going to do is with the sunset layer selected again, go down here and create another curves adjustment layer. Now that's automatically gonna clip it to the sunset layer. If it doesn't for you, just make sure that it's set as a clipping mask to your sunset layer. And then what we're gonna wanna do is make sure that this actual, right by default, it's got this layer mask selected. We don't want that. Make sure that this curves adjustment layer itself is selected. And with that part selected, with the box around the little curves icon, we're gonna go over here, we're gonna use these three icons or these three eyedroppers. This one right here is for your shadows, this one's for your highlights, this one's for your midtones. So let's start with the shadows. We're gonna go ahead and double click on that. It's gonna bring up this target shadow color. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna go into our foreground and we're gonna find the darkest area of our foreground and select that as our shadow color. So I'm gonna go ahead and select an area like right here. That looks pretty good. Hit OK. It's gonna ask us if we wanna save that as a default. I'm gonna go ahead and say yes. And then we go down here to our highlights eyedropper, double click, and then I'm gonna go into the foreground and look for the brightest area of the foreground, which is probably gonna be somewhere right over here inside of our sunset. Hit OK, yes, save it as a default. And then select the middle eyedropper, which is for our midtones. And basically for the midtones, you're gonna look for something that would have been gray in your original image. You're looking for basically like a gray point or a neutral tone. So that's probably gonna be something like one of these buildings over here, maybe even one of the corn cobs right here. So let's go ahead, double click, bring up our target midtone color palette, long name thing. We're gonna select something like that. That doesn't look too bad. It's maybe a little bright. Let's try maybe something over here. Let's see how that looks. That's okay. Yeah, and just try to do a few different points. Try to find something that kind of gives you a gray point. That's a little blue. What about that? That's actually looking pretty good right there. I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. And then again, save that as a default. So now that we've basically filled in our shadow color, our highlight color, our midtone color, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and apply those to the background. And how we're gonna do that is just go back to the shadows eyedropper, and then we're gonna go into the sky, and we're basically going to find the darkest area of the sky and select that. So that's gonna be something like right here. All right, that's looking better. Now we're gonna go ahead to go back to our highlights eyedropper, and then we're gonna go to the brightest part of our sky, which is gonna be somewhere like over here, and select that. That's looking pretty good. And then now with our midtones eyedropper selected, we're gonna go into the sky layer and find something in the sky that would have been basically kind of grayish, which is something like right there. That's actually looking a little green. Let's maybe move it around, try something a little different. There we go, that's looking a lot better right there. And so now we're starting to get something that starts to look like it matches a little bit better with our foreground. So let's go ahead and collapse that, and let's turn this layer on and off. So that was before, and then that's after. I would definitely say the after, it's definitely a lot warmer. It starts to match with the foreground a heck of a lot better. So we're definitely making some progress. It's not perfect, but we're getting there. All right, cool. So now the next thing I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna play with the color of the foreground a little bit. I actually think that it would help if we actually warmed it up even a little bit more, just because now that sunset in the sky is really glowing really strong. And I feel like now the foreground doesn't quite match the strength of that. So there's a couple things we can do. The first thing I can do is actually go ahead and with the sunset layer selected, go ahead and do another curves adjustment layer, or not a curves adjustment layer. This time we're actually gonna go ahead and do a hue saturation layer. And again, make sure it's a clipping mask set to that sunset layer, and then I'm gonna go into the reds. I'm just gonna drag the saturation down a little bit just to kind of lessen that effect. So something like that looks pretty good. And you can even go into the master channel and maybe just bring down the saturation of the whole sky just a little bit to tame it down just a touch. And then now we're gonna go ahead and try to warm up the foreground and make it match the sky a little bit better. So with the foreground layer selected, we're basically gonna do the same thing. We're gonna go ahead down here to our adjustment layers, and we're gonna do a curves adjustment layer. And again, clipping mask right here, make sure it's clipped to your foreground. And then what we're going to do is, first of all, with the RGB channel selected, I'm gonna go ahead and do another S curve and just create a little bit more contrast, something like that. Might bring those shadows up just a touch. I want this to be very minimal. Now what I'm gonna do is go to this drop down where it says RGB, and I'm actually gonna go ahead and go into the reds. And then what I wanna do is increase the reds and the highlights just a touch. So I'm gonna go ahead and drag those up a little bit. And I might even do it in the shadows and the midtones just a little bit as well. Something like that looks pretty good, very subtle. And then I'm gonna go down from red and go into the blues. And then the same thing, I'm gonna drag the blue curve just down a little bit. And what that's going to do is add a little bit more yellow. Something like that is looking pretty good. And then now here's our before and here's our after. Just warming it up just a little bit more to make it match with the background just a little bit more. And I think that definitely helps a little bit more. I think it starts to make the colors match just that much more. Okay, cool. So that's actually looking pretty good to me. I'm fairly happy with that. One other thing I really want to mess with though that's kind of bugging me is the reflections in these two buildings right here. I feel like the reflection color is a little bit too blue. I want to make that a little bit more yellow, a little bit more orange, and really sell this a little bit more. So what I'm going to do in order to do that is go down here, make sure the foreground layer is selected. And then what I'm going to do is create another adjustment layer. I'm going to create this time a color balance adjustment layer. And then with the layer mask selected for that color balance layer, I'm gonna go up here to select. I'm gonna go to color range. And then it actually already did it for me. So I wanted to basically make sure that these windows were selected. So you've got your little eyedropper tool here. If it wasn't already selected, you could just go over here and select it with your eyedropper, and then you can use your fuzziness to go ahead and change the value until you get something you're happy with. So like something like that actually looks pretty good with me, or pretty good to me. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit OK. And then now we've got basically that mask where that selection has now been applied to our layer mask over here for the color balance. So now when we adjust our color balance, it's only going to be applied to that area that we saw before. So with the midtone selected for our color balance, I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of yellow, just a touch of red, and then change the midtones down here to highlights, a little bit of yellow, a little bit of red. And then if we go ahead and do before after, you can kind of see what that's doing. Let's zoom in here on these buildings. And you can see it kind of takes it from blue to a little bit more of like a yellowish orange tint. It's pretty subtle, it's not crazy, but it's just enough to kind of sell it just a little bit more and make it a little bit more believable. And it's those little tiny touches, those little things that you go into, those little details that kind of really sell these transitions and sell these compositions or these composite images. And I'm by no means like a master composite image person. There's people out there who do way better jobs than this stuff at me. I think what I do is passable, it works okay. Most people don't seem to be able to tell that I replaced a sky in the image, which is good enough for me. And I'm not pretending to be a complete expert at this. This is just what I do. You guys can apply it to your own images. I think it'll work pretty well for you as well. But yeah, this is how I'm doing it. And I definitely would say though, it's little details like that that kind of help sell it. But yeah, anyway, I'm gonna go ahead and delete this black and white layer. We don't need that anymore. It's just crowding up my layer tree. And so now the next thing I'm gonna do is do some global adjustments to the entire image. So typically whenever I'm doing these composite images and I'm dropping in a sky, or really you're adding anything to an image, once you kind of get everything pretty close as far as color and as far as brightness, the next thing I like to do is, rather than adding individual like tone curves or curves adjustment layers or color balance adjustment layers to individual parts of the image, I like to start adding in like color balance adjustment layers and curve adjustment layers to the entire image. Because once you start applying effects to the entire image, it really sells the image a little bit more. It ties it together a little bit more. So that's what we're gonna do next. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go down here to the adjustment layer panel, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the color lookup tables. And there's one that I think I want to use for this. And I'm going to go here where it says load 3D LUT. I'm going to click on that, and oops, not that one. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to go down here and go to drop blues. I think this one's actually going to look pretty good. Yeah. And by the way, like all these drop down, or all these lookup tables and this drop down, these are all basically standard with Photoshop. These aren't ones that I've added in myself. So you should have these on your Photoshop, as well. So don't think that these aren't already there for you. So I'm gonna go ahead and use those drop blues. That actually look pretty good to me. And then that's before, and that's after. So I'm actually liking the way that looks. It kind of matted the image a little bit. So what I might do next is actually go ahead and add a curves adjustment layer. And again, these are now, there's no clipping masks on these. These are both being applied to the entire image. So now with the curves adjustment layer, I'm gonna add a little bit of contrast back in. So I'm gonna go ahead and do another slight S curve, drop down those shadows a bit, raise up the highlights just a touch, add in a little bit more contrast. I'm liking that, that's looking pretty good to me. All right, cool. And again, that's after, that's before, after. A little bit more contrast, I like that. Okay, so now the next thing I really want to do is I want to do some dodging and burning to the entire image, and kind of like, and basically like just like with portraits and dodging and burning, it's really just kind of emphasizing the highlights and darkening the shadows just a little bit more, and it gives you a little bit more of that 3D dynamic look to it. So again, dodging and burning, you know, it's not just for portraits. It's for pretty much anything you're doing in pretty much any image. Like you can apply it to all sorts of things. I mean, it's not just for, like I said, portraits. So in order to do that, we're gonna go ahead and add another curves adjustment layer. This one, we're gonna go ahead and this is gonna be our dodge layer. So we're gonna go ahead and drag that curve up quite a bit, just like that. Command I to invert the layer. I'll go ahead and rename it to dodge to keep it organized. Whoops, misspelled that. Let's fix that again. Cool, and then we're gonna go down here, we're gonna create another curves adjustment layer on top of that. This is gonna be our burn layer, so I'm gonna go ahead and drag that curve down just a touch, something like that. And then Command I to invert the layer mask. Double click, rename it to burn. That looks good. Now with the dodge layer mask selected, I'm gonna hit B on the keyboard to bring up the brush tool. I'm gonna hit D to bring up my default colors down here, white and black. Because we've got a black layer mask, we wanna make sure we're painting white on our brush. So I'm gonna make sure my opacity is at 100%, my flow I'm actually gonna bring down to about 10%. And then I'm going to bring my brush up just a little bit and make sure the hardness is pretty soft, like 0, which is about as soft as it goes. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm actually gonna go ahead and go in here and just paint in some highlights wherever I think it needs some highlights. So I'm gonna go right here along the edge of this building. And basically just kind of highlight wherever I think there should be natural highlights. Whatever looks good to you, whatever looks good to me. And that's kind of what we're getting. And this should, again, this is gonna help kind of sell this image a little bit more. I'm gonna go ahead and brighten up these buildings a little bit right there, brighten up these guys, something like that. Maybe just a touch along here. Zoom back out. I might go right along this little line right here. I might even paint over the top of our little motorcycle dude. That way he stands out a little bit more as well. Something like that. All right, so dodging before, that's after, before and after. Again, just trying to create a little bit more of that 3D effect. Kind of bring it to life a little bit more. Okay, now let's go over to burn. Make sure your layer mask is adjusted, same settings for your brush. And now I'm gonna burn the opposite side of this building away from the sun. So again, the sun's back here, so I'm imagining this part of the building and this part of the building being exposed to the sun, and then the back part of the building, like over here, not being exposed to the sun. So I'm gonna go ahead and bring that down. Same thing in this building back here, its face is away from the sun, so I'm gonna go ahead and burn that, bring its exposure down a little bit, make it a little bit darker. Again, try to sell it. Right side here. Right side here. Again, this building is facing away from the sun, so I'll darken that a little bit. Darken this. Maybe a little bit right there. That's looking pretty good. And then what I might do as well is just kind of go up here and just kind of burn the edge of this building, just kind of blend the sky and then the building together a little bit more. All right, so that's actually kind of interesting. I'm seeing right here, if you look kind of closely, you can actually see there's like this little strip of color, like this little white right here where we didn't get a very clean selection. So we're gonna go back and clean that up here in a second. Okay, and then also right here in these buildings right here, you can see where we selected on the outside of these little balconies, and then on the inside right here, there's a little piece of sky remaining from the original image. So we're actually gonna go back here and clean that up as well. And again, that's gonna help sell this just that much more. All right, I'm cool with that as far as dodge and burn, so I'm gonna go ahead and zoom back out here. So here's our before, our burn after, burn before, after, and then let's do our dodge and burn together. So this is before dodging and burning, and then that's after. Before, after. And I could spend more time on this. I could probably clean this up. I think there's a little bit too much. I think the dodging is a little bit too strong. I might bring the opacity down on that to like maybe 65, something like that. Just make it lessen the effect just a little bit. Close that panel. All right, so let's go back and let's clean up some of these edges right here, right? So what we basically have is we have the foreground image that still has a part of the original sky still in it. So what we're gonna need to do is try to find a way of revealing that sky that's beneath it, of the sky that we're using to replace the original. So the way we're gonna do that is we're actually gonna go down here and find our foreground image, which is this one right here. So let me zoom back out and make this a little bit clearer. So if I turn this layer on and off, you can see what I'm looking at, right? So this is our, let me turn the background off. So this is our foreground, right? So we want this layer selected. And what we want to do is basically create a layer mask. So we're gonna go down here to this little toolbar down here. I'm gonna hit this button with the hole in the middle. That's gonna create a layer mask. And then what we're gonna do is on the layer mask, we're gonna paint on it, and we're gonna basically hide these little sections of the foreground in order to reveal the sky behind it. So if that you don't quite understand what I mean by that, just follow along and it'll make sense in a second. So with the foreground layer mask selected, it's white. Be in your keyboard to bring up your brush tool. Since we're painting on a white layer mask, you want to make sure that you're painting with a black brush. I'm gonna hit X on the keyboard to change to my default color of black. And then again, opacity 100%, flow I might bring down to about 5%. And then we want, again, a very soft brush. I'm at 0%, which is as soft as it goes. And then what we're gonna do is just zoom in here. And then with a very small brush, low flow, and a very soft brush, we're just gonna paint over where it's white. And what this is going to do is it's gonna start removing that foreground image and revealing the layer beneath it, which in this case is the sky layer that we're using to replace the old one. And then we're going to be able to start revealing that and blending the two images together a little bit more, which is going to sell this just that much more. I'm actually gonna increase my flow up to 10%. I feel like this is taking a little bit too long. And again, this is mostly just for demonstration purposes. I would probably, if I was doing this for real again, I would leave it at 5%. But just kind of move this along a little bit quicker. I'm gonna bump it up to 10%, and this might be a little bit sloppy. So if I were you, I would recommend taking your time on it. Again, it's the fine details that really help sell these images and make them look like they really belong together as far as two individual layers. And so yeah, I'm just gonna go in here and basically paint away the top layer, revealing the sky beneath it, and try to sell this image just a little bit more. All right, so there we go. I went ahead and filled in all those little areas, and I definitely think that makes a big difference in terms of being able to sell it. You don't have all these little white marks all on the edge of these buildings right here. You got rid of that little white mark that was right here, filled that in. And again, we were just kind of blending away that foreground image and kind of blending it with the sky behind it and just helping to sell it just that little bit much more. So let's go ahead and zoom back out to where so we can see the full image. And to be honest, guys, I think that's really about it for this image. I think that pretty much does it. I'm pretty happy with this. I could definitely go in here and spend a little bit more time and fuss with the details, but for the most part, that's really all the steps I would really take. And I think that even this right here, if I were to post it, most people probably wouldn't be able to tell, at least not at a quick glance. If you really were to zoom in and spend a lot of time, or if somebody was really good at looking at composites or was really good at composites themselves, they might be able to tell that it wasn't exactly the original sky in the image. But I think for the most part, I think for most people, this is gonna be a great option or a great way of going ahead and kind of breathing some life into some old images images that you otherwise were just gonna kind of leave to the trash bin. So yeah, hopefully you guys found this video useful. Hopefully you guys can go back into the archives, find some footage or find some photos that you thought were no good or not interesting, and bring them to life a little bit more, drop a new sky, and throw them up on your feed. If you do, be sure to tag me in the image. I'd love to see what you guys come up with, what you guys create. So yeah, hopefully you guys found this useful. Hopefully this was fun for you guys. If it was, by all means, go ahead and hit that thumbs up button. If you want to see more videos like this, definitely go ahead and hit that subscribe button. I've been trying to put out videos at a rate of about once a week as of late. I've been doing okay at it. Every now and again I miss a week, but definitely a lot more stuff planned, both on the portrait side as well as like city, landscape, and whatever. So yeah, go ahead, hit that subscribe button if that's something that you want to do. If you have any questions, go ahead and leave the comments down below. Or if you guys are a composite master, leave some tips down below for the rest of us. You know, help us out. Give us some of that sweet, sweet knowledge. But other than that, guys, that's gonna be it for this video. So take care, stay safe, keep shooting, and I will catch you in the next one. Later, guys.